Everybody, some ancient history news, 5 stories that have been in the news recently. Some of these discoveries aren't new, but they've been written about in recent days. First, we are going down to Scotland. This is Riney, a small town down here. Right next to the city here, there is a hill with a hilltop fort built on it right here. Let's zoom into that. A story just came out a little earlier this morning on this place. You see it up on top of this hill by Riney, Scotland. There has been some excavation work done here, but you see this is really on the very top of the hill. Give you a great view of the whole area here. Here's a look at the construction up here. Get a good view. Stones up here. You see how the wall is kind of built up around here. Goes around. People up here doing excavation work. I will leave all these links below. Here is an article that just came out this morning. Ancient Tap o' Noth Hill Fort in Aberdeenshire, one of the largest ever. Gives a good pic of it right there. Here is a look at some excavation work going on down below the fort on the hillside here. Up on top, they said there could have been as many as 4,000 people living in 800 separate huts. And they said this might come from around the 3rd century AD and the Pictish culture. It says the Tap o' Noth discovery shakes a narrative of this whole time period. If each of the huts we identified had 4 or 5 people living in them, that means there was a population of upwards of 4,000 people living on the hill. It is truly mind-blowing and demonstrates just how much we still have to learn about the settlement around the time that the early kingdoms of Pictland were being consolidated. This find of historic importance will be of huge significance, says Jim Gifford, who leads the Aberdeenshire Council. I've talked about a few hilltop forts in Scotland in the last half year. Here's another one. Pretty cool. Let's move on. Next story really caught my eye. We're going down to Iran. This is the Ney Shekar region right down here. Pretty interesting story here on petroglyphs coming from a long time ago. Here in this story, it says evidence suggests prehistorical Iranians migrated to Americas. It talks about the similarity in petroglyphs here. It says some prehistorical residents of the Iranian plateau migrated to the Americas, an Iranian archaeologist and researcher says, based on evidence from similarities between petroglyphs. I was a little skeptical at first reading this, but I just found it to be interesting. It says after years of exploring ancient paintings inside Iran's caves and mountains and other parts of the globe, amazing achievements have been made in this regard. The ancient paintings of cave walls and mountains in Iran have been compared with other ones in parts of the world. Their similarities in appearance and motifs have been amazing, according to quotes by Professor Jan Brouwer and Gus Van Veen. And of course, how people came to the Americas 12,000, 13,000 years ago, or whenever they did, has been discussed a lot on my channel. It says these migrations took place from Bering Strait, an area between the northeast of Asia and the northwest of the Americas, or from frozen oceans before the 10th millennium BC. One of the paintings found among mountain petroglyphs in Khomein depicts a hunter man on a horseback, which, like the American Indians, carries blades made of birds' feathers on his back. Here's one of the petroglyphs found. They call this the Mantis Man. Very similar to some rock art you find in North America. Was there a connection beginning a long, long time ago? Well, it's an interesting thing to think about. Let's move on. Next story, we are going down to Cambodia, Angkor Wat. I have not made a long video about this place for quite a while, but I have mentioned it in some ancient history news videos. Here is Angkor Wat right here, but this whole region is very ancient. There's a lot of stuff here, and it's probably been built on stuff that goes way back in time. Let's read an article about a discovery made down here when some of these waterways were drained. Here is a fairly recent story. Turtle in drained Angkor Reservoir. The reservoir houses the remnants of a centuries-old temple now undergoing excavation. There's a look at the turtle found when this was drained. It says, according to the Khmer Times, preliminary assessment suggests that the large turtle, made of sandstone, was buried beneath the temple to ensure the site's safety and prosperity. He adds that it may have been a valuable stone placed for the celebration of any religious ceremony during the time. It says excavations proved particularly fruitful for Sokit and his colleagues. Shortly before the discovery of the stone turtle, the team unearthed 2 metal tridents, crystals, and a sculpture of a mythological serpentine creature known as Naga. On Friday, the archaeologists found another smaller turtle and 2 sculpted fish, according to the team here. Here's a look straight on at the turtle, and I guess they are going to leave it in the ground until they can figure out how to safely remove it from here. This is a pic from 1 week ago. It says the turtle is about 2 feet wide and about 3 feet long. According to the AP, its shell is blank aside from a square etched in the center of it. Now, why would that be there? I've talked a lot about the turtle from early mythologies of the Mayans and the mound builders coming from ancient America. It says the turtle is known as one of the avatars of the Hindu god Vishnu. Sometimes turtles are placed as a votive object in a temple's foundation or at its center. That's an interesting story coming from Angkor Wat. I would have really liked to have seen pics of the tridents and the Naga serpentine figures, the snake figures, but oh well. Why don't we move on? Next story on the list, why don't we go down to ancient Petra in Jordan. I haven't talked about this place in a video for a long time. Here's the most famous area of Petra, and the ruins here go for a long ways. I'm going to be making a video about Petra in the near future because it has a lost history, just like Baalbek does. It's pretty important. Right down here, the Great Temple. This is an area that people are familiar with. Here's a look at one area of Petra, the Great Temple, as they call it, the ruins of it. Here's a look at the famous tourist area of Petra, nearby the Great Temple. Pretty awesome carvings made into the cliff face. People are concentrated on the stone ruins and not so much the people that were honored here. I think that's a major part of the puzzle. I'll be talking about that. Here's a story from 4 days ago. Authorities to launch archaeological excavations near Petra's treasury. Obviously a pic taken in current times. It says the rose-red city of Petra will witness archaeological excavations to unearth the front courtyard of the treasury, Petra's iconic facade. It says the excavation will contribute in uncovering the architectural elements of the lower part of the treasury, as well as completing the archaeological work of 2003 that uncovered some of the tombs and facades below the treasury, he said. It says the work will stretch from the treasury towards the Nabatean amphitheater. And I'll have a video on Petra in the near future. Somebody important was honored here. Next story, why don't we go down to Gobekli Tepe in Turkey. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. Here is Gobekli Tepe from overhead. I talked about this place a few weeks ago, but a good article was just put out within the last 24 hours. Let's just read. Here's a story that came out late yesterday, still excavating Gobekli Tepe, what's been most recently discovered. One of the world's biggest mysteries, Gobekli Tepe, is still being explored, and experts have been recently unearthing some pretty interesting artifacts here. It says here are 10 recently discovered components of Gobekli Tepe. Number 10, hundreds of obelisks have been discovered. I don't think this is new excavation, but you get the point. Number 9, 15 mega-monumental temples were discovered a few years ago, and here's a look down at some excavated enclosures here, the T-shaped pillars. Here's an enclosure at night, and here is an artist's conception of what he thinks the place might have looked like around 11,000 years ago. Number 7, mini sites within the primary site keep on popping up. And I believe only about 5 or 10% of the whole hill has been excavated, but that'll give you an idea how big some of the pillars are here. Number 6, Gobekli Tepe challenges the thoughts on the beginning of agriculture. That's kind of an obvious one. Lots of bones lie in the ancient earth. Here are some little figurines found at the site. Number 4, new findings point towards a skull cult. And we're just starting to wrap our head around what the people at this site were doing. Number 3, artifacts discredit prior ideas of when potteries and tools were initially introduced. And for sure, Gobekli Tepe is kind of rewriting history. The hunter-gatherer label is put on Gobekli Tepe as far as their builders, but I have shown many sites that went back 12, 13,000 years. There was homes and permanent settlements, so just kind of learning the whole story here. It says artwork at the site leads towards possible headless fascination. That is just a guess. Here are pillars at the site. It says number 1, hunter-gatherers might not have been as nomadic as previously thought, and that's what I just mentioned. Sites here that go back 12, 13,000 years that had homes and permanent settlements. Was this their big temple? Is this connected to other ancient sites? Well, ancient name for this place is Portasar. Now, I have never talked about Portasar as far as a name for Gobekli Tepe, but I find it very interesting. It says an ancient Armenian and probably the oldest name is Portasar, and it breaks down into two syllables. Port, which means navel or umbilical cord, and identifies the site as navel of the earth, the seating place where knowledge of the gods was first deposited. Where such epicenters exist throughout the world, wisdom spread across the land like ripples, touching uncivilized and the brute and elevating the potential of humankind. The second syllable, Asar, is revelatory, and I have talked about the name Asar many times. That is the ancient name for Osiris. It can be said then that this hill is the umbilical cord of Osiris, and I find that very interesting. Present-day boundary is the ancient world. Were Gobekli Tepe and Giza connected? They could have been. I think the Port Asar name and the connection to Osiris is very interesting. Maybe a video coming up on some symbolism coming from the pillars up here in ancient Egypt. That might be worth a video. But I think that will wrap it up for today. Ancient history news. Those are 5 stories. Thought you would be interested in. Hope you thought that was cool, and you all have. Very sick.